Good morning. Ooh, we awake. Okay. So that means that I expect like participation throughout. You hear something you like, some snaps, some when you hear something that I said right. So I know that I get you all refreshed and exciting right after break. I also know I stand in between you and lunch. So we're gonna try to make this enjoyable. We're gonna get through it. We're gonna be all right. Thank you for welcoming me and having me. Let me get my notes up here. I may or may not even look at them. We'll see what happens. So once again, my name is Andrew Alemán. My pronouns are he, him. I am Black, Cuban, a cis femme presenting male, who's queer and also a survivor. And I'm excited to be in front of you today. So I have quite a robust agenda today. This is gonna be hard. I like to walk around. Can I use the mic? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Oh, is that better? Can you hear me all right? Okay, good. I like to walk around when I talk, so I will try not to walk around too much, but I will a little bit. I have quite the robust agenda today. We're gonna do this. We're gonna get through it. We're gonna be all right. Don't worry. So we're gonna talk about knowing your why. That's something that I think is really important. And then with that, I will be sharing just kind of a content warning. I will be sharing a little bit about my personal experience, not necessarily details about that experience specifically, but just how it impacted me. So just kind of letting you know a little bit about that. Survivorship and intersecting identities we're going to talk about today. Gender affirming medical care and services. Interrogating our policies and procedures within our places of employment. And then I'm going to leave you with some action planning questions for you to think about in your personal lives and in your professional lives when you leave here. And then on your table, you have note cards. Those are for questions. I know there are some people in here that like to ask questions but don't want to ask them out loud. This is for you. So make sure throughout you write your questions down. We'll have some folks that'll pick them up later on. And then also you'll have the opportunity to ask the question at the end, waiting for the mic until it gets to you because folks can't hear you. Does that sound good? Okay, good. So also today I am really excited. I'm going to be able to share some videos with you for the first time they have not been seen. I have a little blurb that I was asked to share around those videos, so I'm going to read directly from my notes. The videos were created by the National Health Resource Center on Domestic Violence, a project of Futures Without Violence in partnership with the Survivor Leadership Cohort, SLC. The SLC is a year-long program consisting of 10 survivors of IPV, leading the development of resources that center the voices and experiences of survivors and helping to advocate for a more trauma-informed healthcare system. Thank you to Futures Without Violence, a sponsor of today's conference, and the cohort for sharing these and allowing us to debut them for the very first time here today. So you will be the first people to see these, well, not technically the first people, but the first group of people to see these outside of those that made them and obviously myself. Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's talk about knowing your why. I always ask this question when I work with various professionals because I think this is our roadmap. This is what guides us. Knowing our why. Why are we here? Why are we in this work? Why do we stay in this work, right? There's both professional and personal reasons for that. And so when I think about that, I also like us to think about how knowing our why can help us learn our leadership intention. So when I say leadership intention, that's how I show up and how I want people to receive me, right? So how do I want you to receive me? And then also how are you receiving me, right? So that's really our leadership intention. So knowing our why, we can go back to knowing our why and figure out, am I in alignment? Is the way that I'm showing up, actually in alignment with the reasons why I'm in this room today, okay? So I want you to take like 30 seconds to kind of think about, why are you here? Both why are you here in this room, and then why are you in this work? And I'll give you like 30 seconds to think about it. You can jot it down if you want, or you can just keep it in your head, but take that time for a second. One of the things that my background is I'm a licensed clinical social worker. One of the things they taught us as a therapist is to embrace silence and be okay with silence. And that is so hard. I kept wanting to jump in. I'm like, no, don't save them. They're gonna be fine. So did folks kind of get a second to think about your why you're here, why you stay in this work, and all of those things? Cool. So I want you to sit with that and remember that as we go through today, because I'm going to share information that may challenge your why. I'm going to share information that may highlight your why. I may share information with you that you need more of to be able to ensure that you're truly living in your why. And I'm going to share a little bit about my why. So the first picture is a former colleague, good friend of mine, who passed away a couple years ago from cancer, actually, as well. But her work centered in domestic and sexual violence. She was first my advisor when I was in the social work program, and then she was a colleague when I worked in the program, and just became a really good friend. And she was the first person that really showed me that I can take my personal experience and bring it into my work, and to be mindful of what that looks like. How do I find that balance, right? That I'm in this work because it's passionate for me, but also it's not always about me when I'm working with people. And so Dr. Carrie Belden is somebody that I think about all the time when I'm in those spaces. She did a lot of this work in Omaha, Nebraska, and she's the reason why I am able to do work in this field, because she kind of pulled me in and helped me learn how to guide myself. So I'm always thankful for her, and I always share her. This other picture here is from the summer of 2009. I know I still look the same. I was 22 years old. And this was the same summer that I experienced my first sexual assault. And I look at this picture, and every time I see it, I always think to myself, nobody would have known, right? There was so much going on inside of me, both my head, my body, right? There was so much happening, but nobody would have known. And this to me is always a reminder of, we only know, first of all, what people tell us, right? We don't always know what somebody is going through. And for me, I didn't know that I could tell my story. There weren't people that looked like me. There weren't people that shared identities with me talking about this work, right? Domestic and sexual violence was mostly white women, right? Talking about their experiences, which didn't reflect any of my experiences. And then on top of that, when there were folks of color, it was typically just women, right? Men didn't get to talk about these experiences very much, but definitely queer men did not get to talk about these experiences. And so today I want us to also think about, what are the spaces, how are we allowing room and space for people to talk about their experiences? And we'll talk about that a little more throughout today's presentation. This last picture is are my nieces and nephews, who I just found out existed in 2019. That's a long story, but didn't know that I had a sister. And so I also do this work for them. I don't want them to ever have to be that 22-year-old who doesn't feel like they can share their story. I don't want them to have to experience the things that I experience. And if they do, I want to make sure they have the resources. I want to make sure that all of these people in this room are people that they could go to, right? And ask for help because they know that you would hear them, you would respect them, you would be affirming to them, right? Regardless of what that experience was. And so they're the other reason why I continue to do this work that I do. So that's my why. Thank you for letting me share that with you. So let's take a deep breath, because I also know that makes people think about their experiences in life. So in your nose, out your mouth. And for fun, we'll just do one more. Okay. So today, I know that we are doing a lot of our focus on young people. And a lot of my things will seem a little more broad to a general audience. And that's because I want you to also apply these things to both youth and older individuals. That being said, my experiences of working with young folks is, rather than them asking these things that I'm sharing of you, it's an expectation, right? Young folks, they don't really have, well, you know, if you work with young people, they're gonna let you know what they're thinking. They're gonna let you know if they think you're wrong or right. They're gonna tell you how dated your information is, right? I bet some of this stuff is probably gonna feel dated for them too. But that being said, I want us to think about these intersecting identities. We're gonna kind of talk about what it means, what it looks like. But definitely with young folks, this is more of an expectation. This isn't really just an information that I'd like to share. Like, they're already expecting these things of you. Oh yeah, this is my first video, I forgot. Well, I'll get to see the first video. Which one is it? That one.
Oftentimes when I turn up to my clinic, I already feel like I'm just here, I'm just showing up, but I don't feel present because I know that I'm not included, into any of the languages. I show up exactly who I am, I do not fit into the normal gender binary. I do not look like what a woman is supposed to look like. And I don't think that my provider that I trust should be questioning our look, because we are already like being marginalized and left out. And when we trust our healthcare system, your belief should not clash with who I am as a human being. I would say, first of all, we have to fix the language. We have to change the languages that we use when we're dealing with gender non-conforming folks. Having languages that do not allow us to feel like left out. Because in some of in my clinic system, when I asked about languages, what they said to me is that this is and we can't just go into a system and just change the whole thing to please just one group of people. When it's only one group of people that is feeling the exclusion, I often feel that healthcare providers do not listen before offering solutions. Do not just send me to a provider that I've been to, and I come back and I said, this provider is causing me harm, and there are no solutions. We should be able to have the power to help to choose the provider that they're sending us to. Oftentimes we are not given that opportunity. Oftentimes we are not listened to. Oftentimes we are not taken seriously. So I'm suggesting that they do some sensitivity training, and that they listen, and that they definitely work on changing the language.
Okay. First, let's give some snaps and claps to June for sharing their story. So, when I hear June share their story, I hear what we all kind of expect when we go into a medical provider or work with any type of service provider, right? That we're heard, that they're using language that reflects us, and that they give us an opportunity for choice. Like, those are pretty, I mean, would y'all agree that that's basically what we heard? And so I find this over and over. The more queer and trans folks that I work with, I want to go to a place that feels safe and affirming. I want you to use language that reflects me. I want you to give me choice and autonomy. And those things sound like the tenets of affirming care that we talk about, right? So I'm not going to talk about like a trauma-informed care model. I really encourage you to do a trauma-informed care training. But that being said, the tenets: safety, choice or autonomy, collaboration, trustworthiness, and empowerment, right? Those are the tenets of a trauma-informed environment. That's what June's asking for, right? And you'll learn throughout today's presentation kind of my approaches to the work are trauma-informed, harm reduction, reproductive justice, and a social justice framework and tenets. I love this quote by Audre Lorde: "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives." We do not live single issue lives, right? Whenever I see this quote, I always think about Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who really made famous intersectionality. She will say there are a lot of people that supported her in that journey and worked with her on that, but she's the one that's really credited for bringing that forward. And in her work and in her research, she talked about the intersections that Black women held in the workplace on a specific case where they were talking about employment discrimination, right? So I went into this workplace as a woman, a Black woman, saying that I'm being discriminated as a Black woman. The court said, no, you're not being discriminated against as a woman because they hire women at this company. And the women said, yeah, but they only hire white women, right? Then they said, well, they hire Black people as well. So you're not being discriminated against because you're a Black person. And so these women were saying, no, it is the actual intersection of me as a Black woman that is causing me to be discriminated against. And that is really what the tenet of intersectionality is about. It's holding multiple oppressed identities and how the world responds to you and reacts to you based off of those identities. So when we think about the young folks that we work with, you know, I shared my identities. When I walk into a room, I will always be a Black, queer, femme-presenting, cis man, right? I hold all of those identities. I can't walk in a room and not be Black, right? I can't walk into the room and not be somebody who's, you know, kind of femme-presenting. Now, you may not know that I'm queer, you may make assumptions, so that may be something I can hide, but still, it's how I move through the world. And so sometimes when we work with folks, especially young folks, we expect them to only show up with one identity, right? We only expect them maybe to show up as the trauma that they experienced, or only show up as a Black young person, or show up as just a gay or queer or trans person. And so it's really important for us to think about what are all of the intersecting identities that people hold? Are we really making room for all of them, the whole person that we are working with, not just a portion of them? So when we talk about affirming spaces, we're not saying, oh, well, I have a random poster of a Black person in there. What is the culture of your space and your environment? Who is going out and speaking on behalf of your organization? Who are the people that you highlight in the work? All of those sort of things are really important when we think about those intersecting identities. When somebody comes in to talk about a trauma that they experienced, do they feel comfortable sharing with you that they're gay or they're queer or they're trans? Because that actually might have everything to do with why they experienced what they experienced, and you may not have known that because you didn't leave room for it, right? We don't live single issue lives, right? None of us do. And neither do the young folks that we work with every day. Some things to consider with intersecting identities, all the isms and all the phobias, right, show up for us. Societal expectations and pressures, right? So I shared, like, as a person that shows up as more femme presenting in, like, my dress, even though I identify as a man, right? Society has certain expectations of me when I walk into a space, right? Or I walk into a men's restroom, or I walk into, like, a men's space or something, right? There's certain societal expectations and pressures. Same for our young folks. Our socioeconomic status, right? That has everything to do with how we show up, and sometimes why we don't show up or can't show up. What we have access to or what we don't have access to. Understanding survival sex and sex work, and understanding that that is actually a huge aspect of especially queer and trans young people that are experiencing low socioeconomic status or experiencing homelessness, right? A way of getting needs met. And sometimes we miss that because we only focus on trafficking. And I'm not saying trafficking doesn't exist. I've done that work, right? But sometimes we miss the nuance because we're only looking at the situation through our eyes, and we aren't looking through the experience of the young person and why they're in a situation, how they got into a situation, and what their need is, right? A lot of times violence happens because people are exploiting people's needs, young people's needs, right? So if we don't understand what their need is, we're missing all of that, right? So understanding that sex work and survival sex, and the difference that I would say there is survival sex is I have to do what I have to do in order to get my needs met. And sometimes that means trading sex for housing, food, money, all those things. Sex work, oftentimes it's more of a, I've just decided that this is the best way I can make the money I can make, right? Some people may sell drugs, some people may sell sex, right? Even if they're young, sometimes those are choices that they're making, and we have to help them navigate that while also understanding what are the legal implications, right? There are legal laws around that. But once again, it's understanding what is their need. How can we help them get access to that need? Rather than victimizing them right away, right? It's only seeing them as a victim. Sometimes we miss all those pieces. Chosen family. When we talk about their support system, their chosen family may not be the people that we're assuming, right? So they may have a lot of friends or chosen family that when you say you can bring a family member in with you, this person may not be an actual family member, and you're not allowing them to bring this person in because they're not connected by blood, right? That happens in spaces for queer and trans people quite often because it's not their technical family, but it's family. Resources and referrals. You heard in that video, June was talking about, don't keep sending me to the same resource when I keep telling you that they are not affirming me. They're actually causing me harm. And you keep telling me that that's the place to go. We have power in this space, so what do we do to help leverage that? Are we talking to those organizations? Are we pushing back? Are we asking them when we call, hey, what does it look like for you to serve a trans individual? Not do you serve trans individuals, right? Anybody can just say yes. What does it look like? And based off their answer, you can tell how comfortable they are with it or not. Lastly, one size does not fit all. So just because I shared certain things, it's always important to listen to the person. They will share with you what they need, how they identify, what that looks like. Something that Dr. Raghavan said earlier was, what does it mean to you? And I love that question. I ask that to young folks all the time. If they share an identity with me, and as someone that has worked in queer and trans spaces for, I don't know, over 10 years, language changes all the time. And so I just ask people, what does that mean to you? Or what would be important for me to know about that? And thank them for sharing that with you. That's so important because the young person's gonna give you way more information than you had in your head about that specific identity, and you would have missed a lot. I often say the phrase, and I'm sure somebody has said this somewhere, so I'm not trying to take credit for it, but I can't be me if I don't see me, right? And I kind of talked to that a little bit about when young people, young queer and trans people go into spaces, if they don't see reflections of who they are, they're not gonna feel comfortable sharing who they are with you. And that may mean asking the tough questions of, what did you enjoy about coming to this space today? What did you not like about coming to this space today? And then thanking them for sharing that with you. If they can't see themselves reflected, they can't be their authentic self. One of my former clients that I'd worked with was a person in a young person in the child welfare system. They're in the foster care system. And they were trying to get access to hormone therapy. And they had to go through this whole process. This state didn't want to pay for it, so they said, if you can get Medicaid's approval. Medicaid was like, well, we'll do it if the state says you can do it. And it was like this back and forth, court, a bunch of different evaluations, several evaluations they had to go through. They were 18. And in the state of Nebraska, you have to be 19. A 19 is a legal adult. And this person finally hit a crossroads where they're just like, I don't know what I do anymore. Do I keep going? Or do I just say, forget it, I'll wait a year? They told me, I'm tired of having to prove to people that I am who I am. And I thought that phrase was so important because in the service industry, we always forget, in the human services industry, we always forget, we often forget that there's a person in front of us. We have these checklists, right? And all these questions we have to ask them, whether it's in the medical field, you have like 2 seconds to see somebody. In the case management, if it's an hour, that's a lot of time, depending on what you're doing. But there's like a stack of paperwork, right? You have to go through, and you're flying through. And so we go through all these checklists, and how many of us have specific requirements to even receive services, right? And a lot of those will eliminate folks from being able to access those services. And so, once again, sometimes young people feel like they're having to prove that they're worthy of a service. They're having to prove that they experienced a certain trauma, right? Well, then how did that impact you? What did that look like? Sometimes we just dig in asking all these questions, and we're just re-traumatizing. I often say also, and I've heard this in other spaces, the domestic and sexual violence field reflects a lot of the behaviors that people who abuse also reflect. A lot of control, a lot of power, a lot of proving yourself. What are you doing? What are you not doing? Especially when we think about shelters. Where are you going? You have to call when you leave. You have to call when you come back, right? A lot of controlling behavior that I think we mean well by it, but it's the same behavior that the person experienced when they came to us. So, again, I'm tired of having to prove to people that I am who I am. In a sense, I'm tired of proving that I'm deserving, right? So we have to remember that. Time, what, 11:50 or a little after 11:50? Where is my people? Somewhere on there, okay. So gender affirming medical care and services. Ooh, I do know there's a video here too. So before I talk, I'm gonna share a video. The second of the videos that you all get to see. Oh, apparently one can only be open at a time. That makes sense.
Being trans just means that your gender identity and your sex assigned at birth don't necessarily match up. Being queer just kind of means you're not straight or cisgender. It can be anything other than that, and I actually identify as queer. And each person that identifies that way has a unique definition. Trans-affirming care really focuses on respect and language use. First, respect your client, no matter what they identify as or how they identify, no matter what experiences they bring to the table. Respect them as a person and how they want to be treated. When you're looking at language, think about your paperwork system. Think about every single interaction that client might have, from the intake process to being billed, and how you're going to treat them if their name doesn't legally match up or if their pronouns aren't on your paperwork. You have the power to change the paperwork. You have the power to change how you talk to your clients, and you can really make a difference and prevent further harm from happening. I would recommend hiring an LGBT or trans person to help you write your paperwork, to help you look at your practices. I would look at every piece of language on every single thing, from the trash cans that might say feminine hygiene products, because that's not inclusive of me. You could just put hygiene products, pads or tampons. I would suggest educating yourself as well. Watch videos. Talk to trans people. We're normal human beings. We don't have to be something you're scared of. You don't need to be scared of misgendering me or offending me. And if you have an open trans person you can talk to, like me, ask questions. I know as providers, you're probably really good at your jobs. In a busy, hectic job, it's easy to lump people together. As humans, we want to lump people together in boxes. You might want to say, I'm the same as every trans person you've ever interacted with, or I'm the same as every gay person you've interacted with, or every DV survivor. But each of us brings something different to the table. Each of us needs different care. Just remembering that and respecting our voices is the most important thing.
I feel like all the stuff is here at the end for a reason, so I just don't want to get in trouble. Show the whole thing. Eric's story, his story is very similar, right? And the expectations. We are going to talk a little bit about the medical spaces. How many medical providers do I have here today? Oh, good. It's actually really hard for y'all to get time away, so thank you for being here. Okay, so It's hard for all of us to get away. Let me also acknowledge that. Thank you all for being here. Just want to know who my audience was. So when we think about gender-affirming care, trans-affirming care in different environments, what we heard from his video were very similar things, but the biggest thing we heard was paperwork, right? Paperwork is a nightmare. And we're getting better, right? Slowly, but surely. But it's very difficult, especially when we involve things that are billed through insurance, right? That is actually one of the most difficult spaces. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But before I get to paperwork, just some considerations when we're thinking about creating affirming spaces. And we are working with folks that have experienced some type of trauma, especially physical trauma, who are trans or gender nonconforming. Think about language, right? Yes, pronouns are really important, right? Share your pronouns, ask their pronouns. The name that they are introducing themselves to you as, use that name, even though the name on the record may look different, right? And I'll talk about paperwork and documenting in a second. And then body. A lot of trans or gender nonconforming folks may use different language to call certain parts of their body, right? Especially when we think about like genitalia areas or more private areas, there may be different names or language that are used. So understanding that if somebody uses verbiage that you don't know, again, ask, follow up on that of what they mean by that, what they're referring to. And this is different than the conversation that we've had around making sure we're using accurate body part names for young people, really young people, right, for kids. This is we don't feel like that language reflects our experience. So that's what trans folks have been saying is we call this body part something different, right? And so they might talk about wanting top surgery or bottom surgery, right? And they may have, people living with the vagina that identify as like a trans man may still refer to their vagina as their penis or their dick, right? And so understanding that language, right? Understanding that those things may come up and you may disregard it, right? And you may say, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm gonna ignore you. But it's really important, especially when we're talking about violence and physical violence and sexual violence, that we are fully understanding what they're talking about. Consider the whole person. We've talked a lot about that. But that also may mean understanding they may be on different medications, knowing what those medications are, and especially with hormone therapy, if people can't get access to hormone therapy, sometimes they're getting hormone therapy in different ways through street providers or using other people's, their friends' stuff, their old stuff. So just knowing how they're getting it, not necessarily shaming it, but helping them understand what are the risks, how they get access to the things that they need, stuff like that. Clients are not your sole educators. So yes, we want them to educate us on their experience, but we should not be expecting our clients to come in and educate us about the collective experience, right? Just like as a Black person, I don't want to go in and explain the Black experience to all of my providers or people that I'm working with that aren't Black. Even though they may ask it or expect it, I don't want to do it. And I'm not going to do it, right? It's the same thing for queer and trans folks, right? Ask questions that are helping you understand their experience, not necessarily expecting them to educate you on the collective experience. That's something that you're gonna have to do your own homework and learn who are the other people doing the work that you can connect with. Don't make assumptions, right? I always love when, I don't love, when young people come into a room and somebody's like, oh, you got a new boyfriend, or do you have a girlfriend, right? We're making assumptions about who they're interested in. In fact, I didn't even hear Dr. Alemán even use those words, right? It was dating, interested in, talking to, right? That's the language. We don't need to ask specifically about boyfriends or making assumptions that they're dating. It may be important for us to know for various reasons, to educate around sexual health, things like that, but don't make an assumption. Or don't make assumptions about the type of sexual experience that they may enjoy, because that may also limit their ability to share with you what they experience because they feel shameful or they feel like they can't talk about it. In my experience that I had shared earlier, for me, I just was like, well, this is gay culture. This is just the way things are. And it wasn't until later in life that I was like, but is it? Because this wasn't okay, right? It wasn't until later. So I think that is something that we have to make sure we leave room, that they're not feeling shameful. Address your mistakes and move on. We love to do the whole I'm sorry train. We're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Usually I'm so good at this. I've been practicing. My friend was telling me about this language, right? And we go in this whole spiral when we use the wrong pronoun or we call somebody the wrong name or we make an assumption about their identity. Just apologize and then do better, right? Don't, you put a spotlight on somebody and they feel super uncomfortable. And so even though you mean well, the spiral is for you and it's not for them. So that's why I was asking myself is, am I doing this for them or am I doing this for myself? If it's to make myself feel better, that's not your job in that room, in that moment, right? Do that work later. They don't have to be involved in that. And then choice and autonomy we've talked about and we'll continue to talk about. Let me make sure real quick if I have paperwork later, because if not, yes. I'm gonna talk about paperwork when we talk about policies and procedures. I always love to share this spectrums of attitudes when working with young people. When I first came across this, it felt really profound for me. That there's kind of three approaches to how adults work with young people. There's youth as objects, so the attitude that young people have little to contribute, they're just there to do what we tell them to do. Youth as recipients, attitude that young people need to be guided through their participation in adult society, that without us, they would never be able to survive or make it. On paper, that one doesn't sound horrible, but I always ask yourself, ask yourself what that means that you think about them if you think the only way they're able to be successful is because of you. The last one is youth as partners. Attitude that the contributions of young people are critical, welcomed, and valued. I would encourage you to navigate the world with youth as partners, right? They need guidance, right? They do need that second one as well. That being said, they're partners, right? And so if you go into the work with that experience, that's infused through everything you do. The way that you create the spaces that the young people go into, the way you navigate your meetings, the way you navigate when they come in to receive medical care, how you approach the process of a young trans person sharing their experience with you. All of that's infused when you see them as partners. And I saw people trying to get pictures real quick. I know that's the slides, you will get the slides. So don't worry, that will be in there. The last thing that we're going to talk about, so much I want to talk about today, but the last thing that we're going to talk about is interrogating our policies and procedures. It's kind of the last thing. So let's hop in. First, I'm going to share this statement from APA in March of 2022. We know that supporting and affirming LGBTQIA plus youth are the best actions mental health providers, families, friends, school personnel, and community leaders can take. Strong evidence shows that family acceptance helps protect against depression, suicidal behavior, and substance use, as well as promoting self-esteem, social support, and overall health experiences for LGBT youth. We also know that family rejection can lead to significant inequities in LGBTQ youth behavioral health. So first, I say that to acknowledge the role in which we all play in supporting LGBTQ plus youth and understanding that their families may not show up in a way that they need them to, their biological families. But also to say that all medical associations, all major medical associations, have publicly supported over the last couple of years gender affirming care and affirming LGBTQ plus youth health, right, and wellness. So when we think about our policies and procedures, I hear a lot of people make excuses of like, I don't know if we can do this. I don't want to stir things up or cause too much drama or upset anyone. But the experts in medical health are saying, no, this is really important. Not just important and necessary, but it's important for their livelihood, right? We know that suicide rates are high for LGBTQ young people. And we know that while data does not reflect queer and trans young people in domestic and sexual violence as much, we do know that there are higher rates, and I think this was talked about earlier, but for women that identify as lesbians or women that identify as bisexual or men that identify as gay or bisexual, as well as trans and gender nonconforming individuals. So you can Google major medical associations affirming care, and you'll see all the different statements, all the different major medical associations that have come out in support. Okay, so policies and procedures. First, I'm gonna start with paperwork and documentation. Re-look at your paperwork and see if it requires somebody to fit in a certain box. Do you leave room for autonomy and choice? So, do you only have something that says male, female for gender? Do you have a spot that they can say legal name and then name, right? Their legal name may not be the name that they go by. And we're always okay with this when an Andrew wants to go by a Drew or an Andrew wants to go by an Andy. But if an Andrew wants to go by a Sarah or a Katie, we don't know how to handle that, right? We just lose our minds. Schools and all of the spaces. We're young people today, no, we've been doing this forever. So it's not any different. So think about your paperwork. Does it require people to be in a box? Does it leave room for them to actually share their experience, right? And you can also get that feedback from people. There was a video Eric shared, hiring trans-identified individuals. Hire consultants to come in and look at your paperwork, right? They can help you rethink it and figure out what are you missing? What shouldn't you have? All those sort of things. This is one of the biggest barriers when it comes to medical spaces. And documentation is really hard. And so when I was a therapist, I often would tell people, in this space, this is the name that I will refer to you as. In your documentation, because we're billing insurance, I do have to reflect your legal name. So if you ever request your legal paperwork, you may see that, or your medical paperwork, you may see me reflecting you in that name. Oftentimes, I had a little more flexibility than some other medical providers did. So I would often just put a note saying this person refers by this name, uses these pronouns, and throughout my documentation, I will reflect it that way, but not everybody has that privilege. So just giving them a heads up, right? They understand that that's how that may work. Your front desks, right? I've known trans men, trans young people that have gone into like an OBGYN. And people are like, oh, you're not supposed to be here, right? So understanding that they're trained in understanding why somebody, who are your clients, or they're only calling them by their legal name. And sometimes we think about training our like direct staff as far as clinical staff, but we forget admin staff, or we forget front desk staff. They're just as important. In fact, not maybe more important, right? Because they set the tone. We talked about resources, referrals. Oh, shelter and housing policies. So that's a big one in the domestic violence, sexual violence space. Youth shelters are a little better, but for like young adults, it is really hard because we like to house people based off of their sex assigned at birth rather than the gender that they go by. And so that's a really important conversation you all have to have in your organizations, because best practice is based off of how somebody's gender identity is, my understanding of myself and my internal gender, how I see it, right? And so that's the best practice for housing folks in shelters nationally. So think about that in your policies and procedures. Changing areas, right? Are they open? Do they have private space? Most people in general, regardless of their gender, like to dress in private. That's just the way it is. So can we give them that opportunity for really everybody, right? A lot of these changes will really impact everyone. Self-determination, autonomy, we've talked about that a lot today. Do your policies allow choice when you're doing things like their treatment plans, right? Do they actually have a say in those, or are we just prescribing the same thing for everybody, right? Those that are case managers or have been case managers, you know what I'm talking about, because you end up just putting the same thing all the time, and that's not client-centered. And so ensuring that they can be a part of it in that autonomy piece. Staff support is really important. That includes training, addressing burnout, wellness for staff, and ensuring that that the people are able to create an environment that is warm and welcoming, because they may not be feeling that way themselves. And that includes when you have trans and queer staff in your organizations. If your organization does not do great work for the trans community, that impacts those people that work within your organization. So thinking about them as well in policies and procedures, not making them the token, the spokesperson for the whole community, but how can we implement their feedback and ensure that they have a say in things. So I'm about up in my time before questions and stuff. I'm gonna share the questions around action planning. But once again, if you had questions that you didn't wanna ask out loud, now would be the time to make sure that you have those on the note cards. I'm gonna go through these action planning, and then we will go through questions and answers. So, just as marriage equality did not bring liberation to our communities, neither will the fall of Roe or Obergefell or any other legal precedent mark the end of our fights for transformative justice and liberation. The law is only one tool, and the more marginal it is forced to become, the more potential we may find in our collective organizing, care, and action. From Chase Strangio from ACLU. He's the deputy director of their trans justice program. But I share that to say, once again, we all play a role, right? And I think that was trying to be my theme throughout most of today is you each play a role in what this looks like. And so if we're really pushing to make it more marginal, then we can make a difference, right? Whether that's direct care, whether that's policy work, whether that's community work, you all have a role. So the questions that I want you to think about when you leave, and you will get these in your email, is how do your personal thoughts, views, values, and beliefs show up in your work? What is something that you personally can start or stop doing today to make a change? What about long term? What do you individually need to be able to maintain in this work, right? Going back to your why. In order to live in your why, what do you need? And what does a long-term sustainability plan look like for you personally to maintain in this work and continue living through your why? So that is my presentation. I appreciate your time. I think we are going to take some questions. Do you want to take one that is, if somebody has one, yeah, while I read this. No, it can be question or reflections. Thank you.
It's kind of like both, a question and a reflection. I just want to say thank you for your straightforward approach. I've learned so much from listening to you, and I really appreciate you being here to educate us. I have a bit of a concern regarding the pronoun usage. Can you kind of give me some feedback on how do you feel like we're reflecting if we don't necessarily want to use the pronouns? We don't have anything against anyone, but maybe some of us don't really like the idea of having to state who we are. You know, do you kind of understand what I'm saying? I just want to know like what your feelings are about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful question. And also thank you for the kind comments. Every individual has a choice and autonomy, right? And how we navigate our pronouns. So I think that's fair. What I think is non-negotiable is using pronouns that folks have asked you to use. So if somebody says, you know, my pronouns are they, them, and you continue to call them he, that to me isn't okay, right? I don't think that that's non-negotiable. I think that is non-negotiable in spaces that I navigate. For me, the using your own pronouns, I think is just modeling. It's just a sign to somebody, right? Because if I just, and also it helps me not only target certain people, right? Some people were like, oh, I'm only saying my pronouns if I'm assuming somebody is trans. And so then it creates this weird dynamic and I'm uncomfortable. Whereas if I just always introduce myself, hi, my name's Andrew Alemán, my pronouns are he, him, like it's so natural to me now that it just comes off as like a part of my name. So also it's for ease for you, right? That's just in your spaces, you're able to do that. And so and I always say pronoun is just somebody giving you, they're just saying like, hey, this is how I want you to reference me when you're talking about me and placing my name, right? Like it's really that simple. So thank you so much. That's a great question. There's also one here that talks about how dated the spectrum of attitudes is, because it is from 1989. Completely agree. Has there been any research updating this more modern culture or movements? If not, what do you think this might look like? If so, what does it look like? I am not personally aware of other research specific to that. But in general, there is this culture of how do we navigate young folks, right? And we really are in a space where it's about power, autonomy, and I think that really much sits in that last attitude that I shared, right? Them as partners in the work, partners in their lives. And so I think it's still really relevant, even though it's from 1989. But I'm not personally aware of specific research around the attitudes, more of just like cultural shifts and expectations.
I have a question.
Yeah. Oh, you have mic.
Great.
Okay.
First of all, I just want to say it was a great presentation, really wonderful. I was just curious what your views are on family, if there's any family dynamics or family concerns that somebody would have, and whatever that might be, acceptance, or if there's violent partners in the family, or whatever that might be. Can you just reflect a little bit on that? Because I don't know the family dynamics, and I've heard different statements, but I don't really know what's going on with families.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Families and understanding the role that they play. I think, first of all, allowing young people to have a chance to say what their support systems look like, not in front of their family, is really important, because they may say something very different in front of family than they would not in front of family. In addition to that, my experience, especially with young trans folks, is that families are working from a place of fear and not having education. So as a therapist, I had to work kind of with both. I'd work with the families on, you have to understand, your young person has been thinking about this for years, right? Like, this is new to you, but years they've been sitting with this trying to get information. So that's why all of a sudden it seems like they just got an idea one day about their identity. And then I'm working with the young people on, remember, you just dropped this on your parents. This is new to them. You've been working, you've been talking about this for years. So how do we develop non-negotiables? Like, what are things, where do we start? Name and pronouns is almost always the start of creating an affirming space for trans and gender nonconforming folks. So yeah, I think family is a really important role. I always give autonomy to a young person is like, how would you like your family to show up to support you in this situation? And then help them navigate that. I think there's one there, and then is there one? Oh, we're done. Last question, sorry y'all, but I'll be around.
Quick scenario. So I spent a lot of time on social media, and I saw this short piece. I just want to provide the scenario and ask you, what would you do in this case? From the perspective of the person filming the incident. I saw an encounter where there's a public restroom and there is a transitioning male who wanted to use the women's bathroom. There's a woman and her daughter going into the restroom at the same time. And you can just imagine the encounter, the transitioning person wanted to use the bathroom just as much as the family wanted to use the bathroom, but people in the community objecting to the transitioning male going in the restroom with the child and her mother.
Yeah, it sounds like from the scenario, it was a trans woman who is in a process of navigating their gender expression, how they view on the outside. So gender, once again, is internal. My sense of myself. Gender expression is how I show up. How would I navigate it? I think that's kind of vague, but I will say if I was in charge of that space, making sure that there are conversations and expectations of people that work there around, restroom use. Are there restrooms that are accessible for people that may not have to require them to be in that situation? Usually people just want to use the bathroom. And so they would love to not have to navigate all of that tension and drama either. And so what are multiple ways that people can use the bathroom that is safe? Research really says that the people that are, the trans folks that are using the restroom in these situations, they're actually at more risk. Their safety is at more risk than the other folks in the space. And so just recognizing that piece, I think, is really important. But restroom policies in your organizations and education. And also, if you're in one of these spaces, like standing up for somebody in the sense of, if that parent is really upset or uncomfortable, just saying, hey, they're just trying to use the restroom. That's it. Like, it's not a thing, right? So, restrooms is a hard thing right now, and we're in a very, it's a hard time for a lot of trans folks, especially young people right now. but that's a whole different presentation. So I think that's my time. I appreciate y'all. I will be here for the whole day, so feel free to snag me on the side. Thank you.
We want to thank our sponsors, the Blue Shield of California Foundation and the National Health Resource Center on Domestic Violence.